All right, we are here gathered together on this evening to start Genesis 21. Genesis 21, and I am reading from the NASB version, which is probably a little bit different from what most of you guys have, but hopefully if you have problems, and very often, as you know, I ask you guys to tell me what's in your version. It helps us decipher it. All right, we are in chapter 21 where Isaac is born. And it begins with, and the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said. Take note, took note is actually one word in Hebrew. It means many, many things, but basically take note or to attend to or to visit, or in other words, the Lord did to Sarah what he had promised that he would do. And we can go on. Sarah conceived even in her old age, and she gave Abraham a son at the appointed time. Now, do you remember what the appointed time was? We talked about this last week. How much time period are we talking about?
A year, I think.
About 1 year, about a season. Some people said in the springtime. And remember all that had to happen during that time. We left Abraham after the promise, and he goes off and lies again to Abimelech and almost gets all of this whole thing messed up again. But here it is. God said within 1 year, and it tells us here that even though Sarah and Abraham were in their old age at the appointed time, which means so much more than just the 1 year, doesn't it? What else does it mean to have welcome, to have it at the appointed time? God's good time. That's right. Because how many years did they wait for this baby to be conceived and born? Yeah, 100 all told. That's exactly right. But from the promise, you're looking at like 25 years from the time of the promise, God's appointed time. And verse 3, and Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, who Sarah bore to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son on the 8th day as God had commanded him. And it says again in verse 5, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. How would y'all like that? Most of us here, we're not 100, but we're certainly to the point where no, thank you very much.
Right. We'll just spoil the grandkids.
That's right, exactly, because we can give that back, hopefully, usually. And verse 6, and Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Now, this is also a play on the fact that Sarah had laughed when God had promised it, a year ago. She laughed. And, the angels are like, you laughing at me? You laughing at what I say? So, here she is. Yes, everyone's going to laugh with me. And in verse 8, the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Interesting fact, kind of sort of, is that the experts disagree in this culture of how long it is until the weaning. There's actually some reports that a child was 15 years old. A little bit of consensus, a little bit of consensus around 5, but generally the consensus is around 3 years old. Because again, food wasn't like it was here. So when you have a child, you got to hang out a little bit longer with a consistent source of food. So interesting fact here. Now, verse 9, now Sarah saw that the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had born to Abraham, mocking. Does anyone else's verse say something a little bit different there? This is verse 9. What does yours say, Dale?
Mine says, whom she had born to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac.
Okay, playing with it.
That's what
Okay,
mine said.
It's making fun of us.
making fun of. Okay,
Mine says mocking.
mine says yours is mocking. So
Mine's just laughing,
yours says what?
laughing.
Laughing. Okay. So it's interesting that there is a lot of different. What version do you have? What version are you reading from?
I have.
Okay, Harper Collins.
The 5 standard version.
NRS.
So the Hebrew word, if I can get this, 6711. Okay, The Hebrew word is a primitive root to laugh outright in merriment or scorn. So it could be both. By implication, to sport, laugh, mock, play, make sport. Okay. So there is a possibility that Sarah was just being Sarah and seeing her son, who was, child playing with Ishmael was around 13 when Isaac was born. So if Isaac was weaned at 3 years old, you're talking about a 16-year-old with a 3-ish-year-old. It could be that Sarah was just bitter about what all had happened. But most of the versions pretty much say that the tilt in this is more of a mocking, making fun of, laughing. We don't know. We can ask when we get up there. And of the son of the maid, wait a minute, where am I? I'm gone too far. There we go, up there. Okay. So, verse 10, there she said to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this man, the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. It goes back to that point. Isaac is the son of the promise, but Ishmael is still Abraham's son. And the matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son. I mean, Abraham was upset. This child was now 16 years old. He was a young man. So to think about just kind of casting him away and saying, you're on your own, it distressed him. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, for through Isaac your descendant shall be named. Now, did they ask God when Sarah originally said, God's taking too long with this whole thing, let's give Hagar to you to be your wife and have a son through him? Did they ask God?
No.
But now Sarah's saying something again. How many times have they gotten in trouble because the men in the Bible, going all the way back to the beginning of Genesis, listen to their wives when they should not have?
God put it.
I knew I was going to get that from you, Keith. Thank you very much. You're still outnumbered, don't forget. But
We wouldn't have had all this problem if it hadn't been.
we've been there. All right. But here God is saying, do what Sarah tells you. Okay. Again, it goes back to the idea that, men and women were designed to be in union together, to be equals in a marriage. Okay. Sometimes the men get it wrong. Sometimes the women get it wrong. But what should we always do when we have a big decision? Go to God and ask God's decision. Okay. Because sometimes we have the wrong idea. Sometimes they have the wrong idea. We both go to God and listen to what God says. In this particular case, God said, listen to Sarah, because Isaac is the one that's going to be your promise. And it'll go on to say now in verse 13, and of the son of the maid, I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant. And he does, doesn't he? We've talked about this several times. What nation is that?
Iran.
No, Isaac is the Arabs specifically. The Arabs specifically. You said it. Yeah. Yes. So that goes back to the original fight. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy and sent her away. And she departed, wandering about in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water in the skin was used up, and she left the boy under one of the bushes. Now remember, this boy isn't a little boy.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified that, because I had not put together that Ishmael was now between 13 and 16 years old.
Yeah.
Because when I read that verse, I was like, put the baby under the bush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even so, it in a way, if she feels like at this point that the baby's going to die, there's absolutely nothing I can do. I'm going to leave it here and let it die because I can't watch it. I'm going to walk away. Okay. Then she went and sat down opposite him, about a bow shot away, for she said, do not let me see the boy die. And she sat opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. and God heard the lad crying. So God probably heard her too, but God responded to the lad crying. And the angel called out to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's the matter with you, Hagar? Do not fear, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation out of him." Then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and became an archer. And he lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So God did take care of her. Interesting though, think about the fact that there she was giving up and crying out to God, and the young man crying out to God. So it's not in a sense like a baby crying. It is more of an adult of, Lord, are you going to save us? The same kind of cry that she would be giving. And God opened her eyes to see a well of water. Do you think that well was there? You just think God created the well for them? This is a desert land. Yeah. So this is, in my belief, it is a miracle. It wasn't just a matter of she was a hysterical woman and didn't see what was right in front of her face.
I just assumed that he had created the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole lot more that he created the well, as we know he's going to do many times in the future. Now we got a little interlude where, and I won't read it word for word, Abimelech. Now we know Abimelech isn't necessarily a given name. It's a title. It's the title of a leader. And this leader, which is still probably different from the other two Abimelechs that he has had occasion to be with. So this is a third Abimelech, came from Phicol, or with Phicol, which is the commander of his army. And you just imagine at this point that Abraham is in this land. He's a foreigner in this land. He's a very large group of people. I mean, he is really considered to be almost like a prince. He's wealthy, and people are talking about the fact that God is with him. So this leader kind of comes and say, hey, let's show kindness to each other. Let's get along. Let's sign a covenant. And Abraham is actually not quiet about the fact that his people have taken away one of his wells. And he's talking about the fact that, I dug this well, this is my well, and your people are taking away my well from me. And Abimelech says, I didn't know about it. This is the first I know about it. So Abraham actually takes, and I'm looking at verse 29 right now, takes 7 ewes, and he gives them to them. And Abimelech doesn't even know what this means. He says, what do these 7 ewe lambs mean that you have set in between us? And Abraham says, you shall take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand in order to be a witness to me that I dug this well. So in other words, in a way, he's paying for the land because he's a foreigner in the land. But he's the one who dug the well, and he wants to keep the well. So take this to proof that I'm paying for the land, that this is my well. And so they make a covenant together. Now, this is what is interesting when you go down to verse 33. And Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the everlasting God. Does any of you know what a tamarisk tree is?
My Bible says it's an evergreen tree.
It is an evergreen tree. It's an evergreen tree that lives for hundreds of years, and it is extremely slow growing. It takes approximately 400 years to mature.
But you're still there.
Actually, I wanted to bring out a point. Let me get back to it when I get done with this thought. Thank you for that. Nobody plants a tamarisk tree expecting to get the benefit from it. It's supposedly a very nice shade evergreen tree, but in your lifetime, nobody's ever going to get, you're not going to get shade from it. So it is truly a witness to the fact that God has made this covenant with him. This is going to be your land. And here's a place where he has dug a well, and he's kind of, Beersheba is going to play a huge role throughout the Bible. It's a place where Isaac comes back to and Jacob comes back to, where God visits the people. So this tamarisk tree is truly a witness to an everlasting God and an everlasting covenant that God has given. Thought that was interesting. But the thing that I wanted to say about everlasting, going back to our last visit, we talked briefly because I was trying to wrap it up towards the end. Lot's wife turned around and became a pillar of salt. I have read that in Antiquities, which is the history that was written by Josephus, Josephus wrote that that pillar still remained. He knew it, he had seen it, and he wasn't the only one who wrote about it. Clement of Rome, Irenaeus, and Benjamin of Tudela all wrote about the formation living in their day. So, interesting fact. It's gone now. It is gone now, obviously. But, people who wrote histories say that it was still there. So I thought that was interesting. All right. You with me? Questions? Okay, that was the easy one. Now we get to the hard one. Chapter 22. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son. Is Isaac his only son? Why do you think God calls him that?
He's his heir, he's the heir.
He's the heir. He's the heir. Your only son, comma, not your only son whom you love, your only son, comma, whom you love, so that we don't run that together. Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. Now, burnt offerings are voluntary offerings. There's actually places where they are considered to be a worthless offering. So God's telling him to take this and make it a burnt offering. Burnt offering mean, of course, you're going to kill the person and then you're going to totally burn it up. I mean, obviously you're not going to eat a human being, but totally burn it up. It has to be totally burnt up before the night's over. But it is interesting that burnt offerings, it's not a sin offering, it's not a guilt offering, it's a burnt offering, which is considered a voluntary offering.
Is it always person?
It's usually never a
That's
person.
what I was thinking.
Yes, it's usually never a
It's
person.
usually a sheep.
So, we're treading on delicate ground here,
Yeah.
okay? Because what was the culture that they were living in? They were living in a culture that human sacrifice was actually very common,
Right.
okay? Giving a human sacrifice to Molech was done all the time,
Right.
okay? But we're treading on ground here of, is God getting into this sinful stuff? Okay,
Yeah, it's real unusual for God to request it.
right,
Yeah.
so let's see this through and let's talk about what might be going on here. So Abraham rose early in the morning. Notice he didn't argue, okay? We know God argues with God. Okay, Abraham and God, they're pretty close. They talk a lot. And Abraham had no problem negotiating down with Sodom and Gomorrah, 50, 45, 40, 30. And there's no recorded account here of saying, how about a couple of dozen donkeys, How about... He said, so, I mean, what do you think that means? Try and comprehend, try and get outside of mama zone or that. Try and get in spiritual zone here about what might be going on.
He knew God was testing him.
So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, is the 3rd day significant? Okay. Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. And Abraham said to his young man, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will worship and return to you. Now, that's verse 5. Does anyone have anything slightly different in verse 5 from what I read?
We will worship and then we will come back to you.
Okay,
We.
we
Yeah.
will come back to you. Okay, now,
And it says, and mine, it says, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you.
It's
okay,
pretty much what one says.
pretty much, yeah. I am the lad and we, right. The point is here, okay? We'll leave all the discussion to the end, but Abraham is saying, we will be back. Not I'll be back. We will be back. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, his son. So the offering is carrying the wood. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. And Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked on together. And they came to the place which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Now, how old do you envision Isaac being?
Think about that, about 8 years old. 10
I think it's 8 or 9.
Yeah.
Like 12.
Nobody really knows for sure, but theologians actually think he might have actually been close to 30.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Big enough to be carrying wood.
Yeah, he's big enough to be carrying enough wood to burn up a person. And even let's just say he was 12, but he probably was much older than that. Could he have taken out 100-year-old man who's trying to tie him up and kill him?
Absolutely.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Lots
he
of-
didn't. He didn't. Okay, so again, that's gonna be another question. Let's discuss that. Why not? Why not?
Does he have faith in God too? Does Abraham taught him?
Mhm.
Anything?
There was a movie. Did any of you see that
Oh, yeah.
movie that came out?
I saw it.
What was the name of that? It came out not long ago.
His own son.
His only son. That's
Because
it.
I remember I
Say
said,
that.
I never even watched the trailer. I just went, I was seriously thinking I was going to watch something about Jesus. And then it was this, I was totally blown away.
Yeah. And I think in that movie, they made him a teenager.
Yeah, he was a teenager.
Yeah. Okay,
I wouldn't have said any older than 20 at the most.
yeah. Yeah, so basically, he definitely wasn't a toddler or an 8-year-old. He was in the teens to 20s, something like that. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And he was going to do it. He wasn't pretending. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. They said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. And Abraham called the name of this place, the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided.
Do you think he told his wife what he was going to do?
Now, let me see, the Sarah that we know,
That wouldn't have worked.
I don't think so.
I didn't
I
think
still
so.
wouldn't have got up.
I don't think he
Yeah,
lost.
because I think if he had told Sarah, somebody else would have been sacrificed before they ever took the trip.
You wouldn't have.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, I don't know for sure, but most likely not. So what do you think's going on here? What's some imagery? What are we dealing with? Why would God test to this extent?
He was gonna be the father of nations, if so many people and under him.
Okay, very good, yeah.
Abraham had done so many things. Actually tested God's patience, you might say, but I don't know if that, but he just wanted to see if he was truly, had the faith in him, because he had done so many things without asking him and. I think all the time Abraham knew in his heart of hearts that God was going to find something else, because he wouldn't have said, "We're coming back." He didn't.
Anybody else?
It was certainly an extreme test,
He was.
very extreme test.
Yeah, can you think of any other extreme tests in the Bible? Yeah. Yeah. What were you gonna say?
In my Quest Bible, I was reading it today, it said that Abraham knew that even if God let him sacrifice, God would bring him back to life.
Right.
He was not going to take him. He's also prefiguring Christ.
Right, right. It is, exactly. If he had to kill him, somehow God was going to bring him back to life. Now think about that, because think about the imagery here. It took him 3 days to get to the place where the sacrifice was going to come. We know Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days. Isaac was carrying the wood. Jesus carried the cross.
Yeah.
Jesus carried the wood.
Hmm.
And the faith of Isaac, we listen to, and Paul talks about, nobody talks about the faith of Isaac, but Paul talks about the faith of Abraham. But Isaac had to basically willingly believe the same thing, that whatever's happening to me, I am willing for this to happen. Even if I die.
Supreme sacrifice.
Supreme sacrifice. Yeah.
In that movie, that's what he does. He tells his dad, if that's the Lord's will or whatever, that's what he would do.
Well, right. Because he could have taken his dad out. Yeah.
So
So
the faith of Isaac in that case also goes back to faith of Jesus.
exactly. Exactly. It goes back to such an incredibly extreme faith that no matter what happens, it's God's will. If you hear God's voice. So think about how many times, I don't know if you guys search on the internet or look at other preachers and all of their podcasts and stuff. How many times do you see preachers talking about how can you know God's voice?
Yeah, I just went to a sermon on that last Sunday. How do you know what God's will is? How do you know God's will?
And I listened to Reverend Stanley just the other day, and he was saying the same thing.
Yeah.
How do you know when he's talking?
How do you know? That's right.
Where it is good.
And how many of us in our culture, in our day and age would be like, God tells me sacrifice my son? That's not God's voice, right? Okay. Now, would God say that to us today?
I don't think so.
Why?
I don't know why, I just don't think so.
Because Jesus has only been sacrificed for
Yeah,
us.
That's not
Yeah.
his plan, yeah.
Right.
It's already been done for us.
Right. Okay. This book, why am I starting in Genesis and not starting in Matthew?
Because you have to get this before you get to Matthew.
Because you have to understand exactly, we have to understand what humanity is living with and dealing with and what we do. Because these pages, everything in Genesis 1 all the way through Malachi is our human condition. And God is giving and revealing the plan. On the road to Emmaus, when Jesus walks beside the disciples and they didn't recognize him, and he unveiled to him how Jesus was predicted, everything was exactly the way it was predicted in the Old Testament. This is what he is talking about. Okay, there had to be enough faith in a God who they barely actually knew. I mean, really, Abraham is the first one. But he had enough faith in this God course, he had seen God deliver him. How many times? Over and over and over again. You know, frankly, if you're 100 years old and your wife has a baby, it's sort of like, well, if you tell me to kill that baby, you gave him to me the first time. I don't know if any of us did that, but there's that old joke where your teenager kind of acts up. You kind of say to them, I made you, I can make another one just like you, so I can take you out. Well, that's not the truth, but it is in this case, okay? This is all the precursor. This is all the pre-understanding of what faith is required for Jesus. Now, there was actually a case, I don't know how many years ago, it wasn't all that many years ago, it was more contemporary, that a man thought that he heard the voice of God. He killed his daughter and was carrying her body out, and he was naked. I mean, the insanity of it. This is not to say that God will say that. God is not saying that human sacrifice is right. Okay. Now, if we get into a little bit of apologetics, does the world say that God is a horrible hedonistic father for sacrificing his own son?
In some places,
Yeah.
yes, they most certainly do.
Okay,
And they teach that God in the Old Testament is cruel and mean and vindictive and murderer.
mhm.
And so the Old Testament God, they don't teach, they don't learn, they don't get to know what's really in here. They just, that's the bottom line, and they go to the New Testament.
So given the idea that the world right now kind of says God is a cruel, mean God for sacrificing his own son. We'll talk about that in a minute, but let's just take that statement, okay? What does this story that we just read say about that? Did God require the killing of Isaac? What did God want?
Faith,
The faith, the
the
belief, the fear,
And
not,
that
not fear as in punishment, mean God fear,
awesome.
but awe.
Yeah.
Awe enough that this incredible God who created the world, if he says that something's going to happen, it's going to happen. If he tells you to do something in the process of that happening, then you do it because somehow God's going to make it the way it needs to be, right?
And Isaac, it seems like just like Jesus went so humble, went to the cross, didn't say anything or anything, and Isaac went to his cross basically to humble and as a sacrifice, just like he was a sacrificial lamb, just like Jesus was. Although he wasn't sacrificed, but he went there the
So
same
he
way.
went there willingly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Abraham had apparently done such a good job teaching Isaac, because as far as we know at this point, Isaac has not heard the voice of God himself. He
Right.
will,
Yeah.
and he may have, we just don't have documentation of that happening.
Oh.
Yes,
Do you remember in the Hillsdale College course, the professor pointing out a couple of times how passive a character Isaac is, both here and when it comes to marriage and all that sort of stuff, and pointing out how Sarah was such a, I mean, kind of pointing out the family dynamics. Sarah
Yeah.
was not all passive,
no,
but her sons were.
his future bride.
Yeah.
Yes, Isaac was very passive. Very true. I had forgotten about that. I don't know if you guys know Hillsdale College, but Hillsdale College offers free online courses. And their one on Genesis is fabulous. I loved it. They do fabulous. I think they've just come out with Exodus. They have one on C.S. Lewis. They do a lot of things. It's totally free. So you can listen to really good teaching. So, all right. So, God was trying to make a point. Okay, he was doing all the symbolism. We're talking 3 days. We're talking about Isaac carrying his own wood for a sacrifice. We're talking about a burnt offering. What kind of offering did I say a burnt offering was?
Volunteer.
A voluntary offering. Okay. Did God kill Jesus?
No.
No.
Okay, so what happened?
He told the father, whatever you want is what I will do.
What he wanted is for him to be killed.
He wanted him to be sacrificed.
Jesus willingly and voluntarily went to that cross.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Freely.
Freely, willingly, voluntarily. He was a burnt offering. He was not forced by the Father. And as he even said, I could command 10,000 angels to come down right now and minister to me. I am doing this of my own free will.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is the proverbial answer to the world that says God is a mean man, horribly abusive for killing his own son. Jesus was, I mean, he wasn't burnt, but he was the burnt offering in a voluntary willingness to take what it was going to take. And who is Jesus?
Yeah, the son.
Son of God.
The Son of God. He is God.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah.
And he, as much as God, put the plan in place for
Exactly.
how they would redeem mankind.
Exactly. Exactly. Did he suffer on the cross?
Yeah.
Horribly.
Yeah.
Horrible. Okay? We cannot go down the heresy that what Jesus experienced was not real, that it was an illusion, that he did not really suffer. Jesus was 100% God and 100% man. He suffered horribly. Why did he have to suffer? Because our sins. He took all of our sins and he paid the debt. Okay?
Who took wrath.
In what Abraham was being done here is you have to have enough faith and trust in the awesomeness of God that whatever's going to happen is going to be redemptive somehow. Okay? Abraham saying, the lad and I will come back to you. Okay? We will make this work somehow. God is going to make this work. And God did in this particular case. Abraham, a total human being, not God, did not have to kill his total human being, not God's son, but he had the faith enough that whatever God said would be okay. Okay? And that's exactly where the human side of Jesus was. Whatever God says, I'm willing to go through it voluntarily. That makes sense?
Mhm. And also God promised him that Isaac was gonna be his heir and have all, to be the father of everybody, and God can't break his promises, so.
Exactly. That's very true. And why is this a good symbol? Why did this have to happen? Why is this story in there? What is Jesus? Who is Jesus? I mean, Jesus is God. We said that. But Jesus is ruler of the nations, right?
Yeah.
It's all the same symbolism. Okay? Abraham's the father of many nations. God is the ruler. He's the ruler of all nations. But he built it through his son. And Isaac is the son that builds the heritage which becomes the Israelites and the nation of Israel. And through his lineage, Jesus. And so you see how all this symbolism takes place? We cannot look at this just in the natural. We cannot look at this just as God is actually asking a man to kill his son. We have to understand that all of this is the symbolism for what God was going to do through his own son. Not that he was asking for a human sacrifice, but he was giving the preview of what he was going to do when essentially he went on the cross. That make sense?
Mhm.
Questions?
When God told Abraham in verse 2 that he was to take his son and go to the mountain and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. At that point in time, he already had, he already knew of his faith in God. Did he realize he was being tested as a test Or was he simply doing what God told him to do because God told him to do it?
Simply doing it because God
Told him to do it. So did God know? We probably did. That what Abraham was gonna do.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
God,
God is all knowing.
Yeah.
Yes, so God absolutely knew what this was all about. I don't believe Abraham knew that it was going to be a test, because if he knew that it was going to be a test, he would know probably the answer to the test,
right,
and then it wouldn't be a test.
exactly.
Yeah, I don't think Abraham could,
Yeah,
look into the future like that.
Yeah.
And know all the answers.
He just had to follow what God was telling
he
him.
had, yeah,
He did in fact have incredibly perfect faith.
Yeah.
yeah, because that, if you, do you know when you're going through a test?
No, but I know when I'm afterwards.
Okay, what?
I said that afterwards.
Afterwards, okay? I think, I think the lesson there is, you know, I think in a way, did Abraham know it was a test? To an extent, yes. Okay,
Every
to go
test is a
back,
test.
because everything is a test, you know,
We're
God's
supposed-
asking you to do something that humanly
Yeah,
is essentially impossible. To have the ability to kill your own child. So, okay, God, this is a hard one. But okay, I will walk the walk. So what does that mean for us when we're faced with impossibles?
Oh, God, you'll be there to help us go through it.
Right. I think the first question is, exactly, God, is this really you? Okay,
That is the first question.
that is the first question, because Satan will whisper in our ears, okay? So there's nothing wrong with, and throughout this Bible, you know, there are times when people with an earnest heart are saying, okay, God, this is you. Gideon is one of them. Gideon tested God 2 different times, silly little tests. And God had no problem with it. God played along with his testing God. So when you are honestly about feeling that God is calling you to do something, God's not going to be upset for you to say, okay, God, I really need confirmation that this is you. Okay, so that's the first thing. And when you get that confirmation, when you ask that question, you then have to have your eyes open. Okay. And if you do that, I can guarantee you, I almost ask every single one of you to do this. Okay. Because when you do that, God is going to show his answer in so many incredible, wonderful, mysterious ways that you're going to say, that didn't really just happen, did it? He's going to do that.
Yeah, and everyone in here is tested every day in different ways.
Right.
And sometimes, oh, I say tested, that's pretty much what it is. Yeah, and some tests are bigger than others,
Mhm. Yeah.
but
So some tests are world altering tests,
Yes.
you know. Yeah.
But to know that it's all in God's hand. And if you love God, he's going to make everything turn out to the right.
Right. You know, if God's calling you to do
That's right.
something, and it's not necessarily gonna be easy, okay? We can't think that if God's testing us, then it's gonna be real easy. We'll just step off this platform and everything will be fine and roses. Doesn't necessarily mean that.
No, it could be, it could be all kinds of different.
Could be
things. It
all
could take
kinds-
your sight, it could
Right.
do all kinds.
All kinds of
Take your life.
very difficult things. But the point is that if God's the one who's calling you to take that step, then he's going to be with you, and there's going to be a far bigger purpose for whatever God is doing, just like this. And that's the other lesson in what's happening here. Because let's finish reading. So I guess I'll start in 14. And Abraham called the name of the place the Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it will be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. We're talking right there about Jesus in the end of times. That how important was this test? How radical was this test? This test was so radical and so important that his faithfulness proves that you're going to not only be multiplied and your descendants are not just going to be the sand on the seed. Your seed, which is Jesus, it's a singular seed. We're not just talking about Israel here, okay? This is not an allusion to the nation of Israel. This is a singular seed, which is Jesus, shall possess the gate of their enemies. Jesus is, number one, Jesus is the gate, but the gates of hell will not prevail against his kingdom.
He is the gate.
Yeah, he is the gate.
So in your Bible,
The gate.
where it says, send your, read that verse out of your Bible, again, 17.
Indeed, I will greatly bless you and I will greatly multiply your seed.
Okay, mine says descendants.
Descendant,
Or
Descendants.
it's plural. So what you just said in this Bible, it's quite a different statement.
right. Every
Yeah.
translation is not necessarily totally right.
And this
Okay.
is plural.
Yeah,
Or yours is singular.
mine is singular.
It's plural.
Is it?
Yeah. Anyone else have plural versus singular?
I know mine is singular.
Yours is singular.
Offspring, that's what mine says too.
Okay, yeah.
See, I would count offspring as plural.
But it says mine says numerous, offspring is numerous as the stars of heaven.
Yeah.
Because I would have not picked up that this was Jesus.
Yeah, it's one of those hidden things, which is why actually it's very, very important sometimes when God piques your interest, look it up in multiple versions, okay? Bible Gateway, you can, free on the internet, you can hit Bible Gateway and you can look at all different kinds from King James to NASB to all of them. You can look at all of them, okay? And challenge it. Because the fact that seed is meant to be singular is referring to the eventual lineage of Jesus himself. Even though in fact, Abraham is going to have descendants as numerous as the stars. I mean, he's the nation of Israel. But there is one particular seed that shall possess. Now go down a little bit farther. At the beginning of it says, I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, okay? But look at the end of that, and it says, your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. Is that plural or singular?
It's plural. Your
It's still
descendants
plural?
will take possession of the cities of their enemies.
Okay, so you still have it plural.
I
Okay,
still have.
So that's what was confusing me,
Offspring.
because you were using seed.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's why a lot of times when I do book studies, I use the NASB. NASB has a tendency to do a little bit more of a literal translation, not always perfect, but a little bit more of a literal from the original intent of the original language.
See, if you hadn't read that, I would not, just reading that, I would not have picked up to go look and see what that word might mean.
And we'll go on from there. And in your seed shall all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young man, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived in Beersheba. Now, can you imagine that return home? Guess what, Mom? Guess what Dad and I did?
Yeah.
Dad and I had a s'mores party.
That's right. That's right. And what goes on with the rest of this is actually talking about some more lineage, which we're at basically 7:30, so we don't really have to go on with that. It's actually giving us the lineage that's gonna get to Isaac's bride. Which, spoiler alert, is Rebecca. All right, questions? We'll start next week with 23, the death and burial of Sarah. And probably go through. Yeah, probably go all the way through 24. Most of what we'll focus on is 24. Yeah. 24. Maybe start 25. But, okay,
It's next-
all right,
it's
thank
next-
you all.
it's next week, Ashley.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, we won't meet next week because it's Ash Wednesday. We'll be having the Ash Wednesday service, so we'll meet, this will be 2 weeks. So we'll probably, you can read a little bit more because it's a little bit more in there, but we'll probably won't read it, we word it for it, but we'll 2 weeks. All right, bye, Vicky.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Vicky.